The moment my son Mark looked me in the eye and told me I had 30 days to vacate my own bedroom was the moment I stopped being just a mother. He and his wife Jessica wanted to turn my space into a state-of-the-art home gym. They saw me as nothing more than a piece of old furniture that did not fit their modern lifestyle anymore. They thought I was just a 68-year-old woman with nowhere to go. They forgot one very important thing. I was not just their mother. I was their primary lender. While they were busy ordering expensive treadmills and fancy weights, I was quietly filing a legal lien for the $215,000 I had invested in their home renovations. Today, Mark is not lifting weights in a luxury room. He and Jessica are struggling to fit their lives into a small, run-down shack on the edge of town. Justice has a very funny way of finding those who forget their roots. Before I tell you the rest of this story and how I reclaimed my freedom, please drop a comment and let me know which state you are watching from today. I truly value your presence here in our community. Selling a house is not just about signing papers and handing over a set of keys. For me, it was about letting go of 40 years of memories. I can still remember the smell of the old oak tree in the front yard. I remember the height marks we carved into the kitchen door frame as Mark grew up. When my husband passed away, that big house in the suburbs became too quiet. The silence was heavy. It was a weight I could no longer carry alone. So, when my son Mark came to me with an idea, I listened with an open heart. He told me he wanted me close. He said he and his wife, Jessica, had found a beautiful home. But it needed work. A lot of work. They had taken on massive debts to renovate it, and they were struggling. I thought this was my chance. I thought this was God giving me a way to be part of a family again. I sold my home, the only place I had ever truly known, and I moved in with them. I took the money from the sale, $215,000, and I handed it to my son. I did not just give him cash. I paid off every single one of their renovation contractors. I paid for the granite countertops. I paid for the new hardwood floors. I paid for the designer lighting that Jessica just had to have. I remember the day I handed him that last check. Mark hugged me so tight. He told me I was his hero. He promised me that this would be my forever home. I believed him. In my heart, I felt a deep sense of peace. I thought I had purchased a special kind of insurance. I thought I had bought insurance against loneliness. The first year was like a beautiful dream. I was 68 years old, and I felt useful again. I spent my mornings in the garden, pulling weeds and planting hydrangeas. I loved the feeling of the dirt under my fingernails. In the evenings, I would cook big dinners. The smell of pot roast and apple pie would fill the house. We would sit at the table, laughing and talking about the day. Jessica would tell me how much she loved my cooking. Mark would tell me how lucky they were to have me. I felt like the foundation of their lives. I was the one who kept the house running while they worked their high-pressure jobs. I was happy. Truly happy. I look back at those pictures now. I see myself smiling in the garden. I see myself holding a glass of wine at Thanksgiving. I look so sure of myself. I look so safe. But when I look closer, I see the things I missed back then. I see the way Jessica would check her watch when I talked too long. I see the way Mark would look at his phone instead of looking at me. The warmth was there, but it was like a fire that was slowly running out of wood. I was living in a house of cards, and I had no idea that a storm was coming. I thought my $215,000 had built a fortress. I did not realize. It had only built a stage for a play that was about to end. I was so sure of my place in their world. I was so very sure. The change did not happen overnight. It was not like a sudden storm that broke the windows. No, it was more like a slow leak in the basement, a dampness that you do not notice until the foundation starts to rot. For the first year, everything was golden. But as the second year began, the air in the house started to feel different. The warmth of the sun in the kitchen seemed a little dimmer. The laughter at the dinner table started to feel forced. I noticed it first in the way Jessica looked at my things. I had brought a few pieces of furniture with me from my old house. There was my mahogany vanity, the one my husband gave me for our 10th anniversary. There was the grandfather clock that had belonged to my father. These were not just objects. They were my anchors. They were the things that reminded me of who I was before I became just. Grandma. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find my vanity gone from the hallway. I found it in the garage, covered with a dusty tarp. When I asked Jessica about it, she did not look up from her laptop. She just said, "Eleanor, we are trying to clear the energy in the house. That old wood, it just feels so heavy. It does not fit the modern aesthetic we are going for. It is all about clean lines now. Modern aesthetic. Clean lines." Those words felt like cold water. Soon. It was not just the furniture. It was the energy. That was the word Jessica loved to use. She would walk into a room and sigh. She would talk about how the house felt, cluttered. But the clutter she was talking about was me. I started hearing the whispers through the vents. At night, when the house was quiet, I could hear them in the kitchen below my room. I could hear Jessica's sharp, thin voice. She was telling Mark that the house felt small. She was saying that they could not truly host the kind of parties they wanted with a third person, always there. She did not call me by my name. She called me the third person. Mark would mumble something in response. He did not defend me. He did not say, "Jessica, that is my mother." He just sighed. That sigh hurt more than any words could. It was the sound of a man who was tired of being caught in the middle. It was the sound of a man who was choosing his wife's comfort over his mother's soul. I started to feel like a ghost in my own skin. I began to spend more time in my room. I stopped coming down for morning coffee because I did not want to see the way Jessica tightened her lips when I entered the kitchen. I felt like a stain on a white carpet, a smudge on a clean window. I was 68 years old, and I was being pushed into the corners of the house I had paid to fix. I would sit in my chair, looking at the walls, and I would remember the $215,000 I had given them. I had thought that money was a bridge, but now I realized it was just a floor they were walking on, while they looked for a way to show me the door. The loneliness was different now. It was not the quiet loneliness of being alone in an old house. It was the sharp, stinging loneliness of being ignored in a full one. I was a problem to be solved. I was a calculation. I was a burden. I began to realize that love, for some people, has an expiration date, and mine was fast approaching. It was a Sunday evening. In America, Sunday is supposed to be the day for family, for rest, for a big dinner and shared stories. But this Sunday, the air was thick with something foul. Mark asked me to sit down in the living room after dinner. He did not sit next to me. He sat across from me, in the expensive leather chair that my money had bought. Jessica stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, looking like a judge presiding over a courtroom. Mark would not look at me. He kept looking at his hands, or at the designer rug. "Mom," he began. His voice was shaky, but determined. "Jessica and I have been thinking a lot about our future, our health. We are starting this new fitness journey, and we realize we really lack the space to do it right." I sat there, my back straight. I waited. "We need a dedicated space," he continued. "For the Peloton, for the heavyweights, a place for Jessica to do her hot yoga. And, well, your room is the only one that really works. It has the best light. It has reinforced flooring." I felt a coldness spread from my chest to my fingertips. "My room?" I asked. My voice was a whisper. "You want my bedroom? For a gym?" Mark finally looked up, but his eyes were like glass, cold and unfeeling. "It is not just about the gym, Mom. It is about optimizing the space. We want this house to be a temple of wellness. And honestly, We think you would be much more comfortable in one of those new senior living communities downtown. He said the words, senior living community, as if he were offering me a vacation. The ones near the park are very nice, Jessica added from the doorway. Her voice was like a blade. They have professional staff, people to talk to. You would have your own little place, and we would have our space back, our space. I looked at my son. This was the boy I had stayed up with when he had the flu. This was the man whose college tuition I had paid. This was the person I had given $215,000 to, just so he could be happy. Mark, I said, my voice gaining strength. I sold my home for you. I gave you every penny I had to fix this roof over your head. You cannot just throw me out for a treadmill. We are not throwing you out, Mark snapped. The guilt was turning into anger now. That is what people do when they know they are wrong. They get angry. We are optimizing. It is a business decision for our lifestyle. You are being dramatic. Dramatic. I looked at the space where my father's clock used to stand. I looked at the walls I had paid to paint, and then I looked at the man my son had become. He was a stranger who valued a piece of exercise equipment more than the woman who gave him life. At that moment, the betrayal was complete. It was not just a suggestion. It was an eviction. They had decided that my presence was a direct threat to their wellness. I see, I said. I stood up slowly. My knees ached, but I did not let it show. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me weak. I will be out in 30 days, I told them. Mark looked relieved. Jessica actually smiled. She probably already had the paint colors picked out for her new yoga studio. They thought they had won. They thought I was a defeated old woman who would go quietly into the night. They had no idea that I was already thinking about the legal documents in my safe deposit box. They had no idea that while they were optimizing their house, I was about to optimize their debt. I walked up the stairs, each step feeling like a mile. I went into my room, the room that was soon to be a gym, and I shut the door. I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat on the edge of my bed, and I began to plan. If they wanted to treat me like a business transaction, then I would show them exactly how a business transaction works. The house was silent, but it was a heavy, suffocating kind of silence. After the conversation in the living room, I went upstairs to my bedroom, the room that was soon to be a gym. I did not turn on the lights. I did not need them. I knew every corner of this space. I knew the way the moonlight hit the dresser. I knew the slight creak in the floorboard near the closet. I could not sleep. How can you sleep when the person you gave life to has just told you that you are an inconvenience? My heart felt like it had been bruised, but as the hours ticked by, the bruise started to turn into something else. It started to turn into steel. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I walked downstairs. I moved like a shadow. I went into the kitchen that cost $85,000 to remodel. I reached out my hand and touched the quartz countertop. It was cold, very cold. My money had paid for this stone. My money had paid for the custom cabinets and the high-end appliances that Jessica loved to show off to her friends. I stood there in the dark, and I remembered a day 3 years ago. I remembered sitting in the office of my old lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He had been my husband's friend for 40 years. When I told him I was selling my house and giving the money to Mark to pay off his renovation debts, Mr. Henderson had looked at me over his glasses. He had said, "Eleanor, I know you love your son. I know you want to help him, but as your lawyer and as your friend, I cannot let you just give away $215,000 without protection. Life is unpredictable, Eleanor. People change." I remember smiling at him back then. I remember saying, "Oh, Mr. Henderson, Mark would never let anything happen to me. He is my son." But Mr. Henderson was a man who had seen the worst of people. He insisted. He told me, "Eleanor, we will structure this as a private loan. We will record a secondary lien against the property. It will be a silent document. Mark does not even need to think about it unless things go wrong. But it will protect your investment. That night in the dark kitchen, I realized that Mr. Henderson had been my guardian angel. He had seen the storm coming when I only saw the sun. I went to the small desk in the corner of the breakfast nook. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a locked metal box. I found the key under a loose stone in the garden earlier that evening. Inside the box were the documents. I sat there with a small reading light, and I read the words. It was all there. The promissory note, the deed of trust, the secondary lien. Everything was signed and notarized. Mark had signed these papers in a hurry, probably not even reading the fine print because he was so excited to get the money for his renovations. He thought it was a gift. But the law saw it as a debt of $215,000, a debt that was secured by the very roof over his head. I felt a strange sense of calm. For 3 years, I had been a mother who gave everything. Now, I was a woman who was reclaiming her life. I was not being mean. I was not being vindictive. I was simply, as Mark would say, optimizing my assets. I spent the rest of the night writing. I wrote a formal demand for payment. I wrote about the terms of the loan. I wrote about the consequences of default. My hand did not shake. My eyes did not tear up. The woman who had been hurt by her son's words was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her value. The sun began to peek over the horizon. I looked at the quartz countertop one last time. It was still beautiful, but it no longer felt like mine. And soon, it would not be Mark's either. Packing 68 years of life into a few suitcases is an impossible task. You realize very quickly that most of what you own is just a stuff. But the things that matter, the photos of my husband, the letters from my sisters, the small porcelain bird my mother gave me, those fit into a single box. I waited until Tuesday morning. Mark and Jessica were both at work. They were busy with their high-pressure careers, busy planning their new fitness journey. They thought I was spending the day looking at nursing homes. They thought I was being a good, obedient mother. I worked quickly, but I was not frantic. I moved with a quiet dignity. I packed my clothes. I packed my books. I left the furniture. I left the mahogany vanity in the garage under the tarp. I left the grandfather clock. I did not want the things that were heavy energy. I wanted to be light. I wanted to be free. The house felt empty as I walked through the rooms. It was a beautiful house, but it had no soul. It was a museum of modern things, but it was not a home. A home is where you are wanted. A home is where you are respected, and I was neither of those things here. I called a local moving company, a small business run by a man I knew from church. They were quiet and respectful. They loaded my boxes into a small van. They did not ask questions. They could see the look in my eyes. It was the look of a woman who was starting over. Before I left, I went into the kitchen. I took the manila envelope, the one containing the legal demand for $215,000, and I placed it right in the center of the kitchen island. I put a small, heavy stone on top of it so it would not blow away. I did not leave a note of anger. I did not leave a letter of goodbye. The legal documents said everything that needed to be said. They were the truth. And the truth does not need a long explanation. I took my keys, the silver keys that I had used for 3 years, and I laid them next to the envelope. I walked out the front door, and I did not look back. I drove to my new apartment. It is a small place, on the 2nd floor of a quiet building near the library. It does not have quartz countertops. It does not have a designer kitchen, but it has something much better. It has honest sunlight. The sun pours through the large windows in the living room, hitting the hardwood floors. It feels warm. It feels real. As I unpacked my boxes, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in 3 years, I did not have to worry about the energy I was bringing into a room. I did not have to worry about being a burden. I sat in my old rocking chair, the one Jessica hated, and I watched the sunset from my new window. I was alone. Yes, but for the first time, I was not lonely. There is a very big difference between those two things. I knew that in a few hours. Mark and Jessica would come home. They would see the keys. They would see the envelope. They would probably laugh at first, thinking it was just some dramatic gesture from an old woman. But then, they would open it. They would read the words from the lawyer. They would see the amount, $215,000. They would realize that the third person they tried to push out was the only person who was keeping their world together. I closed my eyes and listened to the quiet of my new home. I was 68 years old, and my life was just beginning. I had my dignity, I had my independence, and I had a very, very good lawyer. A week had passed since I walked out of that house. In my new apartment, the mornings were quiet. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the birds in the park across the street. I felt a peace I had not known in years. But, miles away, in the house, with the quartz countertops and the empty bedroom, a storm was breaking. Mark and Jessica had spent that week celebrating. I can imagine them, laughing as they measured my old room. They probably had catalogues spread out on the kitchen island, picking out the most expensive gym equipment money could buy. They thought they had finally optimized their lives. They thought the obstacle was gone. But then, the mail arrived. It was a Tuesday. I know this because that was the day my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, called me to say the notice had been delivered. It was not just a regular letter. It was a certified, legal notice. In that house, Mark probably opened the envelope carelessly, thinking it was just more paperwork for their new fitness equipment. But as he read the first few lines, I imagine the color drained from his face. His hands probably started to shake. The letter was from the bank, but it was triggered by the legal lien I had placed on the property. You see, when I paid off their $215,000 in renovation debts, it was recorded as a private loan, a secured loan. The notice stated that because of a material change in the household and the formal demand for repayment, the loan was now in default. The bank, which held the primary mortgage, had been notified of the secondary lien. According to the terms Mark had signed 3 years ago, the entire balance of $215,000 was now due, in full, within 30 days. If the payment was not made, the house would enter the foreclosure process. I can almost hear the silence that must have fallen over that designer kitchen. I can see Jessica looking at the letter, her face turning from confusion to pure terror. The modern aesthetic they loved so much was suddenly worth nothing. The clean lines of their house were now just the bars of a financial cage they had built themselves. Mark had always been a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought his mother was just a sweet old woman who did not understand how the world worked. He thought my money was a gift he was entitled to. He forgot that in America, business is business. And debt is a ghost that will always come back to haunt you if you do not treat it with respect. They had no savings. They had spent everything on the renovations and their high-pressure lifestyle. They had leveraged themselves to the hilt to look successful on the outside, while being hollow on the inside. The weight of their choices was finally beginning to press down on them. It was not a physical weight, like the tartare Mark wanted for his gym. It was the weight of $215,000 of cold, hard reality. For 3 years, I had been the foundation of their world. I was the one who held everything up. When they pushed me out, they did not realize they were pulling out the very pillar that kept the roof over their heads. The storm was not just coming. It was already there. And there was no place for them to hide. My phone rang at 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. I saw Mark's name on the screen. For a moment, I just watched it glow in the dim light of my living room. I felt a flicker of the old motherly instinct to protect him. But then I remembered the way he looked at me when he said I was an inconvenience. I remembered the way he chose a gym over his mother's dignity. I answered the phone. "Mom, Mark's voice was unrecognizable. It was thin, brittle, and trembling. He sounded like a frightened child. "Mom, what is this?" "We got a letter. The bank called. They said the house. They said there is a lien? They said we owe you $215,000 immediately?" I took a slow breath. I kept my voice calm. "Hello? Mark? Yes, that is correct. Those are the documents you signed 3 years ago when I paid for your renovations. It was a private loan, secured by the house." But you said you wanted to help us," he cried out. I could hear the desperation in his voice. "We thought that was a gift." Jessica is hysterical. "Mom, she is already talking about moving. We cannot lose this house. It is our dream." "Mark," I said, and my voice was as cold as the quartz countertops in his kitchen. "A dream built on someone else's sacrifice is not a dream. It is a theft. You told me you wanted me to leave because you needed to. Optimize the space. Do you remember saying that?" There was a long silence on the other end. "Mom, please," he pleaded. He started using the tone he used when he was 10 years old and had broken a window. "We are family. You cannot do this to your own son. Think about the memories. Think about everything we have been through. We can work this out. You can move back in. We will forget about the gym. Just, please, withdraw the lien." I felt a surge of sadness. Not for him, but for the woman I used to be. The woman who would have said yes. But that woman was gone. "Mark, listen to me very carefully," I said. "When you told me to leave, you told me it was just business. You told me it was about optimizing your life. Well, I have decided to take your advice. I am 68 years old. I have no house of my own because I gave the money to you. I have to think about my own future, my own wellness." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "I am simply optimizing my financial portfolio to ensure I have enough for my own care in my later years. As you said, it is not personal. It is just of business." "You are destroying us," he screamed. The child was gone, and the angry, entitled man was back. "After everything we did for you, we let you live here. We gave you a room. You let me live in a house I paid for," I reminded him. "And then you told me a treadmill was more valuable than my presence. You made your choice. Mark, now you have to feel the weight of it." "Mom, please. Jessica is saying she will leave me if we lose the house. 30 days. We cannot find that kind of money in 30 days. Then you will have to sell the house," I told him. "And you will have to pay me back every penny of that $215,000. Whatever is left, you can use it to find a place that fits your new, optimized lifestyle." "I hate you," he whispered. It was a venomous, ugly sound. "No, Mark," I said softly. "You do not hate me. You hate the fact that I finally stopped letting you walk all over me. Goodbye, Mark." I hung up the phone. I did not feel happy. There is no joy in seeing your child fail, but I did feel settled. The psychological manipulation, the guilt, the feeling of being a third person. It was all over. I had cut the cord that was strangling me. I looked around my small, sunlit apartment. It was quiet. It was mine. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was not living for someone else's approval. I was free. The sound of a gavel hitting a wooden block is a very small sound, but it has the power to end a world. 3 weeks after my phone call with Mark, the house with the quartz countertops and the designer lighting was sold on the courthouse steps. It was a foreclosure auction. I did not go. I did not need to see the look on my son's face when the keys were handed to a stranger. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, called me that afternoon. He told me that the sale went through After the primary mortgage was paid, there was exactly enough left to pay me my $215,000, plus the legal fees. The money arrived in my bank account a few days later. I sat at my computer, in my small, sunlit apartment, and I looked at the balance. $215,000. For a moment, I felt a sting of sadness. That money represented my old home. It represented 40 years of marriage. It represented my sweat and my tears. But then, I realized it also represented my freedom. It was not just a number on a screen. It was my ticket back to the woman I used to be, before I became a third person in a house where I was not wanted. Mark and Jessica had to move out immediately. They did not have the credit or the cash to buy anything else. They had spent 3 years living a lifestyle they could not afford, built on the back of my generosity. When that foundation was pulled away, they collapsed. I heard from a mutual friend that they moved into a small, run-down rental house on the outskirts of town. It is what people in the country call a shack. The roof is old. The windows are drafty. The kitchen is small, with cracked linoleum floors instead of thatch-iron countertops. The irony is not lost on me. Jessica finally has her privacy. She finally has her clean lines. But there is no room for a home gym. There is no room for a yoga studio. There is barely enough room for their bed and a small table. They are living a life that is truly optimized. They are living within their own means for the first time in their lives. And they are finding out that without my money, their means are very small indeed. As for me, I did not stay in that apartment for long. I realized that for 68 years, I had been living for other people. I lived for my parents. I lived for my husband. I lived for my son. I had spent my whole life being an anchor, holding everyone else in place while the currents of life swirled around us. It was time for me to be the current. I packed a single suitcase. I bought a ticket to Florida. I wanted to see the ocean. I wanted to feel the salt air on my face. I wanted to go somewhere where the sun was warm and the people were kind. I am sitting on a white sandy beach right now, near a place called Sarasota. The Gulf of Mexico is a beautiful, sparkling blue. The waves are gentle, whispering against the shore like an old friend. I have a small cottage near the water. It is simple. It is bright. It is full of plants and books and the smell of jasmine. I spent this morning writing a letter. Not to Mark. Not to Jessica. I wrote a letter to myself. I told myself that I am sorry. I am sorry for ever believing that my value was tied to how much I could give to others. I am sorry for thinking that I had to buy love with $215,000. I am sorry for letting a man I raised treat me like an inconvenience. I realized something important today, as I watched a group of seagulls playing in the surf. I never needed that room in Mark's house to feel whole. I never needed their approval to be worthy of respect. My dignity was never something they could take away, because it was never theirs to give. I am 68 years old, and I am finally, truly, happy. I have made new friends here. Women my age who have their own stories of sacrifice and survival. We go for long walks. We have dinner parties where we laugh until our sides ache. We talk about the future, not the past. Sometimes, late at night, I think about Mark. I hope he is learning something in that small house. I hope he is learning that a home is not made of granite and expensive gym equipment. I hope he is learning that the most valuable thing you will ever own is the love and respect of the people who stood by you when you had nothing. But I do not dwell on him. I have released that weight. The sun is starting to set now. The sky is turning into a canvas of pink, orange, and deep purple. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I am going to walk down to the water and let the tide wash over my feet. My life did not end when they kicked me out. It did not end when I lost my son to his own greed. In fact, my life actually just began. I am Eleanor. I am 68. I am independent. I am debt-free. And I am finally home. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of Eleanor's journey. As I sit here, listening to the gentle rhythm of the Florida waves, I cannot help but think about how many people are going through something similar. We spend our whole lives building foundations for our children. We sacrifice our comforts, our savings, and our time. We do it because we love them. We do it because we want them to have a better life than we had. But there is a very important lesson in this story. Love should never be a reason to lose your common sense. Eleanor was a mother who loved deeply, but she was also a woman who was smart enough to protect herself. She knew that family is a blessing, but financial independence is a necessity. Respect is not something that is given just because you are a parent. It is something that is maintained through boundaries and self-worth. If Eleanor had not kept those legal documents, if she had not listened to her lawyer 3 years ago, she would be the one living in a rundown room right now, instead of her son. Mark and Jessica had to learn the hard way. They learned that you cannot build a luxury life on the back of someone else's pain. They learned that a home gym is worth nothing if the foundation of the home is built on betrayal. Please take a moment to reflect on your own life. Are you being treated with the dignity you deserve? Are your contributions being recognized? Or are you being treated like a piece of old furniture that can be moved into the garage? Remember, you are worth more than a spare room. You are worth more than an optimized space. Your gold years are meant to be lived with joy, not with the fear of being a burden. If Eleanor's story touched your heart today, please give this video a like. It helps us share these important voices with more people who might need to hear them. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice, family, and life lessons that matter. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a difficult family situation? Let's support each other in this community. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep your head held high. And remember that your life is your own. God bless, and thank you for watching.